Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 13th of January 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, of course, Mike Robinson. And we're delighted to be joined today by David Scott, Northern Exposure, but also Dr. Graham Downing. So we've got a very full news programme. We've got a lot of interesting material to cover. And really, it's a reflection of the speed at which events are unfolding around us. But we're going to kickstart today with a report on Melanie Shaw. Now, we said yesterday that Melanie had been sentenced to 2 years in a Nottingham court. She was not present. She was on video link. The case was not made public, available to the public. So essentially a secret court, and she gets a 2-year sentence, but we didn't know what. Now, we've made a report on the UK column. That was really to try and bring people up to speed with the information that we had yesterday. So if you want to read that, it's still
well. And in fact,
valid.
I just want to say thanks to everybody that has shared that already on Facebook. Please keep sharing it. We want to give Melanie as much exposure as possible.
This is absolutely right, because we think that Melanie is in a very dangerous position at the moment. And this is the reason why we now have learnt that she's to appear in Derby Court on the 25th February 2017 to face charges of alleged assault against HM Prison Fostenhall staff. Now, what is so dangerous about this is we know from Melanie's communications with us, she was talking about being bullied, harassed, stripped naked, riot squads from the prison, males coming into her cell, threatening her. She's been kept in solitary confinement for 9 months. She's been denied medication. She's been brutalised. And now we're to understand that against all of that, if Melanie has reacted in any way, she's now being charged with assault. But if you think about it, she's still technically being looked after. What an unpleasant expression that is, by the same staff who are now going to take her to court claiming that they've been assaulted by the woman who's a traumatised child abuse victim and whistleblower. We also understand that police officers have visited Melanie Shaw while she's been in prison. We understand that Melanie didn't cooperate with them, but it would appear that those police officers, deeply interested in knowledge about connections between the Nottingham child abuse and, we believe, members of Parliament. So this is very dirty and dangerous stuff, and Melanie's going to need as much support as possible.
Now, I wanted to highlight this this comment on the from the YouTube channel, which says Melanie Shaw must have some very hot potatoes to share. It's a crying shame that somebody didn't record a full account of all she knows, especially Beechwood apparent brothel subscriber names, before the associates of the same got hold of her. And I just thought, Brian, it was worth mentioning. Of course, that is not the case. There is a full account available.
This is absolutely true. We have to say to people, please be aware that Melanie, as many other abuse survivors, are very delicate people. They've been through a lot. They're traumatised. So it can be very difficult to get information from them. But we're pleased to say that over a number of months, Melanie has given a number of people very comprehensive and recorded accounts as to what she went through, what she learnt, what she knew. And of course, she's commented on the fact that she had absolute proof that Nottinghamshire police did not fully investigate the Beechwood abuses. That was a web of lies and a cover-up. But we are delighted to say that the testimony from Melanie does exist. However, how that is used requires great care. So if you can, stay with us on that, and we will release more information about that in due course. Now, somebody's already anticipated us by saying that basically, where is Melanie Shaw's MP? Well, Melanie Shaw's MP is the Labour MP, Chris Leslie. This is, I believe, a very unpleasant photograph, because this is Chris Leslie prepared to have a glad hand bonhomie photograph with Melanie when she was out of prison. Melanie, of course, worked for Chris Leslie as part of his PA staff, so he knows her extremely well. But this despicable man has done absolutely nothing for Melanie whilst she has been in prison, and indeed he's done nothing to support her story of abuse or to give her help. Now, somebody made a very, very good suggestion to us. We know that Melanie has had letters sent to her blocked by the prison or stolen, and the contents of letters and packages sent to her in HMP Foston Hall blocked or stolen. And the suggestion was made that anyone writing to Melanie at the prison should send that letter to her MP so that he can appreciate the scale of public interest, but he can also be made responsible for seeing that letters from the public actually reach Melanie within the prison system. But words almost fail me on this case that we have our Prime Minister, Theresa May, says she abhors child abuse, but what has she done as Home Secretary, in her time as Home Secretary? She has helped this brutal setup, an attack on an extremely brave whistleblower, Melanie Shaw.
Let's just get a little bit of comment. David, you first. What are your thoughts on what's been going on around this case recently?
My thoughts are what we have here is a case of the British state being involved in torture. There doesn't seem to be any other word for it. This is every bit as bad as what's been going on at Guantanamo Bay and other such places. The huge amount of time in solitary confinement is a psychological torture that can be described as nothing else. And we have our court system conniving with this and not allowing any proper examination of the rights of the case. We used to have a law called habeas corpus that was meant to stop this and allow any member of the public who was concerned to get matters properly examined by a fair hearing.
Indeed. Graham, you're a doctor. Is it fair to say that when somebody has been in solitary confinement for 9 months, that is a form of torture?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that massively stresses the individual, which causes huge problems with the endocrine system. And, you know, the same thing with animals. If you do experiments on animals, we do experiment on any living thing, and then you lock it away for a period of time, you deny it access to light, or you deny it access to other human interaction, there can be very serious ramifications from that. I mean, that sounds astonishing that someone would be locked up for that period of time in England. I'm not an expert on the prisons, and I'm not an expert on what they do in that, but obviously I can tell you unequivocally that absolutely can cause damage to someone.
Melanie's been a long time user of, how do we describe the drugs?
Well, she's needed drugs in order to maintain a normal life. She's needed help to sleep, and she's also needed medication like Prozac. Whatever we believe about that, but has been at a stage where she's only been able to have a normal life by getting the support of medication.
So that medication's been withheld from her, Graham, and not through any weaning off process. It's just been withdrawn. That can also only have a pretty negative effect on her well-being.
I mean, sure. I mean, there must be some prison doctor of some sort that is overseeing her care. I'm not privy to what she takes or why they're doing. I mean, it sounds incredulous that they would take medication from someone that needs it. So obviously we need a bit more detail. I think the whole problem of all of this stuff is you don't have information. And I think you said with the court case, it's incredible that in 2017, the UK subjects are not, they're going through a court system that sounds like something from a third world country, not the UK.
I'll just say, Graham, that we had absolute proof that she was denied her long-term medication. Valium was one of the drugs that she'd relied on. We have absolute proof that she was denied the medication. And the other trick that was carried out in HM Prison Peterborough, that's a private prison under the control of Sodexo, was that they would withhold the medication for a few days. Then they would actually try and get her to take more than she was supposed to take, and then they withdraw it again. So actually there's a very clear record, but you use the word care. It seems to us that actually now within the prison system, care is disappearing fast. This is a brutal system around this woman, and I think they want her destroyed mentally and physically in order to bury the evidence that she has, which includes the brutalisation of children by British MPs.
Okay, well, let's move on to health matters. David, north of the border, first of all, we've been talking about the state of the NHS in the last few days, and a couple of stories from north of the border giving examples of how bad it is. This first one from the Scotsman saying a young father, 31, left dying on a bus for 5 hours. What happened here? An ambulance not available?
No, it's a very tragic story where this man, who is a resident in Fife, actually not very far from where all the Sheikh O'Bayo incident occurred, suffered a heart attack on a bus, and he wasn't noticed. The bus was parked, and he was left there unnoticed and unattended for 5 hours, and he very sadly died. So a tragic individual situation, but maybe it gives an indication of a more general lack of care. How he was missed at the end of the bus route, I don't know, but he was, and he sadly passed away. This next story is more key to the NHS. The building illustrated here. This is the main hospital in Glasgow, known locally as the Death Star, with typical Glasgow humour. And it's got staffing problems. Now, the extent of this has not been revealed. It's got staffing problems, it's got capacity problems, and from what we can see and what we're hearing, the situation's getting worse. But this particular case that happened in the last couple of days, where expecting mothers have been turned away from the maternity unit because there was no room.
Right, well, that's a pretty spectacular situation. Okay, well, let's get into slightly heavier stuff then. And this Newsweek article that I sent to Graham a week or so ago, how scientists are in Britain are deciding the future of humanity, and they're saying, of course, they start off with the great success story, because they're talking about a young bouncy 7-pound baby that ended up needing cancer treatment, wasn't able to get or at least the cancer treatment wasn't successful, and so they're building new facilities in order to offer gene editing facilities. Graham, this is a very big topic, and we don't have a huge amount of time, but gene editing must have massive ethical implications.
Oh, well, I mean, it's you're opening up the ultimate Pandora's box. This is something which we're just not equipped to understand. We're at such to use the term again, embryonic stage ourselves. We don't really understand this stuff fully, and there's been a division. Really, there's always people that want to move forward, and there's always people that are conservative and cautious. And I think the scientist that's mentioned in that story, and don't get me wrong, that's an incredible outcome. That was about 2 years ago. I think they saved this poor child's life. That's wonderful, but it's where do you stop? And this is the problem. When there's broadly what we call germ cells, which are involved in reproduction, and there's other cells called somatic cells, which are just cells of the body, if you like. And when you start mucking around with the body cells, with reservations, that's not so bad, because the damage is limited to that individual. But when you start bringing in mucking around with germ cells, then suddenly you can cause changes into the overall human gene pool. And what they're starting to do, they're dipping their toes now into that area, and that's the difference. This is the problem, and this is the reason why some people are very worried about this. And I think even the head of the National Institute of Health, which is like a huge, probably the biggest scientific organization, if you like, in the world, and even he says he's worried about it. I don't think anyone is, only the people that seem to be want to profiteering from it. And there's huge public-private things being set up, and companies to try and patent this technology as well. And there's a lot to talk about. I can't do it in 10 minutes, but I'm not happy about it. I think some of it is needed, but I think we have to put the brakes on it. And just knowing how human nature is, they're not going to do it. They're just going to keep going and keep going until they cause a problem. And that, for me, is incredibly worrying.
Okay, well, what we've done is take some articles from, say, the last 6 or 8 months, which describe some of the issues that you're talking about here. And this first one is from The Independent, saying that Microsoft is going to solve cancer within the next 10 years by treating it like a computer virus.
Yeah, this is what we've got. If you ever see those things called TED Talks, TED, there's always like some incredibly wealthy person, or, you know, the head of Apple or Bill Gates, and they're all very, you know, smart and cool looking, and they all get up and deliver these wonderful speeches. And really it's hubris, because they're not going to cure cancer. Microsoft isn't going to cure cancer in 10 years. And, you know, and really they're talking a lot about big data in some sense, but also trying to develop more efficient, faster and better computers, which can store more data in order to do this. And they're talking about using biological computers, which is DNA. And I think, there you go. Yeah, if you look at that, that shows how they're starting to use DNA to store information, storing videos and storing text. And all they do is, there's a code in DNA. So what they're doing is they're transcribing, if you like, into that code binary digits, which is obviously the basis of machine code in computers. And by doing that, they can use DNA to store information, you know, under the guise of, well, it's great because it lasts for thousands of years, but really we don't need to do that. So this is just, once again, every single area they can be pushing, they're going to push until someone stops them. But because there's so much profit in it, and potential profit, I don't see how they're going to stop them. This particular one here, I think that was to do with mitochondria. And within your cells, you have other cells called mitochondria, and they're like energy factories. And they're not us. They've actually evolved with us. We have what's called a symbiotic relationship with them. Without them, we'd die. They produce energy, and we need energy to live. And if you get genetic defects where maybe a gene is off in one of these things, then there can be problems. It can be fatal. And so what they're doing now, and if you read that article,
so the headline of this, sorry, Graham, the headline of this article is "Unexpected Risks Found in Replacing DNA to Prevent Inherited Disorders."
Well, we've now got the go-ahead to do this technique here with couples, and I think it's already gone ahead. They've got the first couples. It's been done, I think, in America as well, is where if there's damage in this DNA, they can come in and use another parent's DNA. So you have 3 parents involved in this making this child, but there's errors in it. And if you get one of these errors in it where you don't remove the original DNA properly, then what can happen is this can then come back like a supercharged bully and start to destroy and cause problems with the mitochondria. So there's huge, I mean, there's huge problems all over the place with this stuff, but they seem to be going ahead way too fast. And this is awful. This came out some time ago, and they're crossing another Rubicon where they're actually taking human stem cells and putting them into animal brains. And this is a nightmare from the worst scientific movie. I mean, the mind boggles at what could happen with this. And it just seems like they're taking the restrictions off. And but see, we're stepping into that river, the Rubicon. The famous 49 BC or wherever it was. Julius Caesar crossed with his army into Rome, and you're not meant to do that. And once you do that, you can't turn back. Well, we're dipping our feet and our toes firmly in that river now. We still have time to rein this in and ensure it doesn't go the wrong direction. But you have so many public-private partnerships. I think there's the Chen Zuckerberg, which is the Facebook guy, and his wife, who's a pediatrician. They've set up a big organization. I think it's 600 million they've put into it to fund this research. You've got other big organizations involved. And at some point, maybe not him, but they're going to want a payoff for this, which means they're going to have to roll this stuff out and commercialize it. So that's the problem.
But the biggest danger has got to be the militarization of it.
Well, there's DARPA, the famous DARPA, and there's a list of experiments there. And when you look at it, it actually looks pretty good, because what they're saying is, look, we're working with post-traumatic stress disorders, we're working with people who can't speak properly, and they're using all this wonderful technology to try and put implants in the brain. But really, that's great, and I understand that. But once again, it's an easy guise to get us to keep moving forward to the transhumanist thing of trying to turn us into machines and look at us like machines, and where does it end? And where does it? And I don't see it ending anywhere particularly. I can't actually read that article. If you could read that for me, I could.
Well, this one is the RAM Brain Implant Initiative, and from reading this is one of the experiments that DARPA is pushing through. And what they're suggesting is that they're wanting to speed up the memory in the human brain through electronic intervention, and that absolutely is heading towards transhumanism.
Oh yeah, and also we must remember they're probably a lot more advanced than what the public domain is seeing, because if it's anything to do with military technology, we all know with aircrafts, these things are out there 20, 50 years before you ever see what's really going on. So we must allow for some latency. But you're absolutely right, it's pushing ahead, and there doesn't seem to be anything that's going to stop it. And the problem is you are crossing that Rubicon. And once you get across the other side, there is no turning back on this. And especially when you look at the interface between human and machine. And there's a whole later on this year, I'm doing a whole talk on this at AV8. We're bringing that into that venue, and I'll be talking about a document that's got released regarding this from the White House, which is an astonishing document, mapping out how many years ahead they think they're going to be at certain goals. And we're all looking at just the overview of this, which everyone probably knows a bit about, is that if you watch the worst Terminator movie in the world, they have this kind of overseeing, over this kind of controlling software that controls everything. And from weaponry to information to any kind of technology to medicine. And the American government released some time ago, nearly half a year ago now, that they plan to have that up and running within 15 years. And also what they say in the document is the coding that runs it is beyond the ability of man to code. It's going to be coded by machines, and we're already seeing that now. And this is the stuff of sci-fi movies, but it belongs in movies and on TV. It doesn't belong in everyday life, and I certainly don't want to see it in the future of our kids, but they are absolutely pushing this now. There's trillions of dollars of investment, and as I said, equivalent to cities of public-private partnerships. And at some point, some common sense has to rein in. But as we know, at the moment in the world, there doesn't appear to be a lot of that in terms of leadership of countries and quote-unquote global leadership.
Well, I mean, this is a very small amount of money, but you just wanted to highlight the fact that although DARPA is a US organization, they are funding this research right around the world. This is Cardiff University getting a small amount of money for the RAM project, and that looked like a year-long contribution towards that project. So this is research happening globally for this.
Yeah, I mean, Wales, lovely Wales and Cardiff, and yet it's right in there. Nothing against the researcher and the university. They all want funding. They want to push technology forward. And there are positive outcomes of some of this stuff, as I say. But, like I said, how far do you go? How far do you push it? How deep into the human psyche and consciousness do you want to push? And they're planning to go all the way. They're trying to reproduce consciousness. This is what they're trying to do, and cognition, and they're absolutely so close to it. And as I said, within probably absolutely within 10 years, 15 years, you're going to see this stuff rolling out on a vast scale. And the problem with all this stuff is pushing towards this kind of human machine and robot stuff. People don't realize that serious institutions have looked at this, and they're predicting over the next 18 years that when the AI technology comes in, up to 50% of this country will be put out of work. I mean, that's astounding. We can't afford to pay. We've got people living on the street now. What the hell would it be like if 50% of the population is out of work?
Well, they'll be put through a process to remove them as the useless eaters is the answer to that, I think, Graham.
I mean, like I said, when you start to look at this, it's hard to deny a lot of the people that would take that view. And I don't see how you could support 50% of the people. And there's a guy, I think it's called Elon Musk, who's one of the big movers and shakers in this. And he come forward with a great idea. Well, we'll give everyone a basic wage. I mean, that's been tried before. Isn't that called communism? Hasn't that already been tried?
Well, Graham, on this program this day last week, we pointed out that it was Perth, wasn't it, David, or where was it?
It was Fife and Glasgow. Running. There's a trial coming forward in Fife and Glasgow. In fact, it was discussed on Good Morning Scotland on the BBC this week. It's clearly been pushed by the SNP. They're going to run a trial to bring in a guaranteed basic income, and this is their attempt to solve the problems of the welfare state and related matters. And it is, of course, a form of subsistence slavery when you get to that point, that we will be owned by the state.
Absolutely. Now, Graham, you wanted to end on this one because your background is in DNA, and you are an expert on DNA and have trained with some very serious DNA pioneers, perhaps. But just tell us why you wanted to end with this article here about Watson.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is one of the shared the Nobel Prize with Crick and Wilkins. Wilkins was a professor at the lab I worked at and studied at. And, and I saw the famous DNA helical model, or the helix model, every time I walked through to get to the lab that I worked in. And it was all pioneered at the institute that I worked from. So, yeah, I was taught by some pretty clever people. But unfortunately, if you look at this article, he made some incredible derogatory racist remarks that you would expect from someone who possibly has got more of a eugenic bent than wanted to help the world. And if you go down the article, it mentions other people as well, the pioneers of eugenics, which is obviously the I think it's a half cousin of Darwin, and you get all of these kind of guys. And what's happening is it seems to be rearing its ugly head again. And I'll be mentioning this in the talk when I do the talk. So you have the guy that discovered DNA, and he was, although they said they shame him in this article, but the reality is that the roots of this stuff, has comes from eugenics, and has been used for eugenics, and that stuff hasn't gone away. And as you just mentioned, what's going to happen when there's no jobs? What's going to happen, when we have to deal with this AI technology? Then you're going to see these kind of, this kind of eugenics-esque vibe will start to come more into the open again, and we've already seen it in terms of modifying children to get perfect children. We haven't really discussed that in this slot, but I think we did it in another program. And all of this is just, it's going the wrong direction, and someone's got to just take it and move it in a much, much better direction.
Okay, Graham, thank you very much. We'll move on to the news then.
We'll move on to the news. Well, let's lighten things up because there is some good news, and here is the good news. The BBC is taking it upon itself to protect the truth. So I'm sure that we'll be getting to the bottom of all this DNA manipulation in no time at all. I was greatly encouraged by this. Let's have a look at the article. Here it is. The Guardian, we've taken. The BBC sets up a team to debunk fake news. And I just said to myself, thank goodness that somebody's finally arrived to protect the truth. So what the BBC is going to do is set up a reality check team. It's going to focus on content that is, quote, clearly fabricated and attempting to mislead the public into thinking it's been produced by a reputable news organisation. This was another comment that false information around big events such as the UK's referendum on leaving the EU and the US election have been especially rife. So that seemed to hit a nerve, but not to worry because the BBC is going to be looking out for the truth. Now, we think the BBC might be a little bit worried about this sort of thing circulating. I took a cursory look on the social media, his media lens, and they just happen to be focusing on BBC head of news, James Harding, who is the man who is heading up this reality check team.
Right. So
could it be he doesn't like the fact people are beginning to dig into him? And what do they say here? The head of BBC News is James Harding, Murdoch's former editor at the Times, and we'll come on to that. So let's see what this man says. He said the BBC can't edit the internet, but we won't stand aside either. We will fact check the most popular outliners on Facebook, Instagram and other social media. We're working with Facebook in particular, that's interesting to know, to see how we can be most effective. Where we see deliberately misleading stories masquerading as news, we'll publish a reality check that says so. And he wants it to be hugely popular. It's going to be a public service that he's providing. They're going to aim to use styles and formats, online TV and radio, to ensure that the facts are more fascinating and, quote, grabby. I nearly read grubby there, but I couldn't believe that would be right, grabby, than the falsehoods. And, editor of the Times. And when he was editor of the Times, he had to apologise to the Leveson inquiry for running a newsroom that was breaking the law, basically. As editor of the paper, the Times, I'm responsible for what it does and what its journalists do. And so I want to say at the outset that I sorely regret the intrusion into Richard Horton's email account, by a journalist then in our newsroom. That's hacking they're talking about.
Yes.
I'm sure that Mr. Horton and many other people expect better of the Times. So do I, although I'm editor. So on behalf of the paper, I apologise. So this man was running a grubby hack newsroom, and he is then rewarded by being promoted into head of BBC News, where he's going to protect the truth.
As you do.
As you do. Well, it gets better. Let's bring in a bit more because they're going to tackle false information by doing slow news, in-depth analysis and expertise in a bid to help the public understand an especially tumultuous period in the UK's history. We're not quite bright enough to understand it on our own. BBC's going to do it. And then a quick 290 million has appeared because they're going to set up a, quote, intelligence unit within the World Service. So they are going for the mind of the world. Now, the UK column exposed the 3.65 billion network of the BBC. We warned about the charity media action, but now we've got 290 million for World Service. And just to finish off this, we had a little look at the World Service Twitter page this morning, and we think we're looking at a bit of propaganda here because Obama is about to go, but here he is, the respectable, besuited man with the attractive young girl. He's receiving letters that the BBC selects and says to him, we think these are important, President. But he's a president who's just on his last legs. But if we contrast that with how they deal with Trump, clearly this is a tweet designed to undermine the forthcoming president. So we'll end on Mr. Harding. Here he is. And when we just reflected on the BBC, we said, here's the BBC that's failed to tell the truth accurately on Brexit, Jimmy Savile, child abuse in general, Syria, Libya, European Union, sexual abuse at Oxford and Cherwell Valley College, Yemen, the child abuse inquiry, the US elections, Holly Gregg, Common Purpose, Leon Britton, Russia, Ukraine. And then I thought I'd better stop.
Yes, because you've run out of room there.
I've run out of room, Mike, but I am encouraged. We did phone the BBC this morning to say, was there a small problem that the head of news had been the man who'd previously been running a hacking organisation called The Times. They said, we'll come back to you, but they didn't. We did call World Service and ask for an explanation of the imbalance between those two tweets, but they didn't come back to us.
No. Well, continuing with the sort of fake news agenda, we'll start off with this one. David, Meghan McCain, this Meryl Streep speech is why Trump won.
Yes, Meryl Streep, the Film Actors Guild lives, and Meryl Streep made a speech at the Golden Globe Awards, hugely hostile and attacking Donald Trump. And it was actually fake news. It was attacking him for something that he didn't do, and he was accused of, and came out the next day at the time and said, no, that's not true. That's not what I was meaning. He was mocking a journalist, as he does. Turns out the journalist was disabled, and the claim was he was mocking his disability. Trump said, "No, I have no knowledge of this man being disabled, but I was mocking his backtracking in the press over me." And this was turned into a huge thing by Meryl Streep, and a few other attacks went in besides. And it just illustrates that at no point has any lessons been learned by the left wing in America as to why Trump won. It's still a mystery to them.
Well, absolutely, but it didn't end there, of course, because we got the release of the report, the background to assessing Russian activities and intentions in recent U.S. elections. So that has just been regurgitated by the press as well without any particular assessment or analysis of it.
And it's amazing. Please, people watching, go and have a look at this. It's a declassified intelligence report, or so it says, on Russian hacking, and there's nothing in it. There's absolutely nothing in it. It talks about Russia Today having an editorial line that the American CIA don't quite like. Well, Russia Today is entitled to have any editorial line that they want. There's nothing there. There's no evidence. Nada. Nothing. It's an amazing report because essentially they might as well put out 10 sheets of white paper.
Well, we also wanted to highlight Vladimir Putin's response to all this stuff, all these allegations of hacking and interference in U.S. politics. You sent me a little video clip. I'm just going to read what he said. He said, so I was talking to a Western colleague of mine. We were talking about the so-called influencing of their political processes. And I said, that's Putin, I said, what do you do yourselves? You're constantly meddling in our political processes. And the Western friend said, it's not us, it's the NGOs. And Putin said, well, oh, really? But you fund them and you send them instructions. And his Western friend said, what instructions? And Putin said, well, I read them all the time. It's true, I read them. My ex-colleagues bring the originals to me, not copies. So he was really having a bit of fun with it.
He was indeed. And again, Putin and indeed Trump come across as, whatever you think of them, whatever you think of the policies, real. And the BBC and its fake news agenda and all the rest of it come across as simply living in la-la land. If the idea of the BBC policing fake news is ridiculous. We've just lived through the Syria conflict. I was looking at a couple of headlines. The BBC said UN says civilians shot in the spot in the Aleppo battle. Syria conflict, eastern Aleppo faces total ruin in 2 months. There's going to be a genocide. That was what was coming out of the BBC. What was coming out of globalresearch.ca after the end of the battle? Aleppo is celebrating free from terrorists. Who's the fake news? It's clearly the BBC. And what they're doing is they're setting themselves up to take on the entire world via the internet. And despite 3.65 billion, they are going to find that they have insufficient resources for that particular fight.
I believe that's absolutely true, and I think this is a very critical thing. These people have had to come into the open now. They're showing themselves for what they are. Can the BBC react to millions of people who've still got a brain that can think? They're going to be hard-pressed. But what a despicable organisation the BBC is. And they're such cowards because, of course, you tried to get a statement from them. They're too frightened to even communicate.
David, then, of course, we had the first press conference and Donald Trump called BuzzFeed News a pile of garbage. He refused to take the CNN reporter's question and he wasn't too impressed with the BBC either.
It was wonderful. It was so entertaining. I mean, I have concerns about Donald Trump. I don't like his spending plans, his military plans, or indeed the tariff barriers. But he's a real human being. It was a glorious moment. The CNN reporter tried to interrupt and ask a question, and he said, "No, I'm not taking a question from you." And the reporter pressed on, and Trump just pointed straight at him and said, "You're fake news." And a wonderful moment. And then the next question after one was the BBC, and he says, "Who are you from?" "Oh, BBC." "Oh, another beauty," he said. So he's obviously got a very similar view of the BBC to the UK column.
And we'll also mention who is behind the dossier alleging the secret Trump-Russia contacts that the mainstream press just seems to want to regurgitate without any balance.
Yes, Mr. McCain at it again. And putting this out. Now, this was a hit piece prepared apparently when Donald Trump was running for the nomination for the Republican Party. And this is a hit piece prepared at the instigation of Jeb Bush to find dirt on the Donald to force him out of the race. So it's grubby, nasty, real politics. And it wasn't used because it was fake and it was completely unsubstantiated. And then it was leaked out now by McCain. Very strange. Of course, McCain is meant to be the same party, so it's clear that Donald Trump has considerable opposition from within his allegedly friendlies over there in Washington. So he will have difficulties.
Well, of course, this whole fake news issue is one symptom of the alleged rise of populism right across the world, and it's a demonstration of the desperation of the elite, if you want to call it that way. And this is another example of it. This is a report from report that Demos is preparing, that they were tweeting out today that you could go and have a look at some of their initial analytics on it. It's called Nothing to Fear But Fear Itself, and they're mapping the politics and culture of fear in the European Union. And they say the major research project from Demos seeks to capture how an emerging culture and politics of fear is gripping the European Union as a whole, and its unique manifestations within member states, including the UK, Germany, Spain, France, Sweden, and Poland, working with a broad consortium of stakeholders, including research partners on the ground in these 5 member states. Demos is exploring how social, political, and economic change and the growth of populism are shaping public policy, party politics, social cohesion, media rhetoric, and citizens' own identities. So if you want to find that, you can go to the Demos website, and it's entitled Nothing to Fear But Fear Itself.
Can we just add in there that we should remember, of course, that Demos put itself forward a couple of years ago to be running courses in schools, so that it was Demos who was going to say what was true on the internet and what youngsters should avoid as fake news. Demos, quite remarkable.
Yes. And north of the border, we have the fake news agenda there too, but they seem to be personalizing it quite a bit.
This is a very worrying development. One of the things that was best, I thought, that spoke best to Donald Trump's character about in his press conference, as he was lambasting, rightly so, the fake news and the fake media who were in front of him. He said that he has a megaphone. He has this position, and he can fight back and he can answer back. But he's seen a lot of people over the years who have not had that position, not been able to answer back, and have been destroyed by the fake news, by the lies. And I thought that actually was really quite good for that they would use that moment to bring that point across, that the real people are harmed by fake news. And then in Scotland, we have this. This is a very odd situation. We have here a video blogger. Now, he's blogging. I'm not particularly familiar with what he says. He's blogging in the general area of the alt-right, so it's anti-political correctness, anti-feminism, and he's been accused here of the normal range of accusations that such people get, which is he's anti-Semitic, homophobic, racist, anti-women, and all the rest of it. So he's been pasted here by the Daily Record as the lowest of the low. But there's a very strange series of facts about this. They call him vile. They say he spews hatred, and there's one thing missing, and that's a quote. They haven't been able to quote. He's got a YouTube site with hundreds of videos on it, hours and hours and hours, probably days of videos of him talking to the camera. And this newspaper didn't come up with a single quote of him of actually saying anything that was completely beyond the pale. And they had a little embedded video in the article, and the embedded video actually sounded like it could have come from the UK column. He was speaking at an alt-right rally, but what he was saying on that video was quite mild. So I don't really know what he stands for. I don't know what he believes. I suspect I wouldn't agree with hardly any of it. But he's been hounded out of the country. His home that he shares with his father has been staked out by the press, and we're now having them calling him vile and all the rest of it on a national newspaper. And he's fled to the United States. It's a very worrying development for free speech in Scotland. And it's one of the other things is they've suggested that the police should become involved. Hate speech.
Well,
and
is this a black ops so that they can use this as a baseline for then attacking other alternative media sites? Is that what's going on?
Perhaps, because he's got 2.1 million views, he's got 20,000 subscribers, and Police Scotland have had 0 complaints. So how racist can he possibly be?
He may be telling the truth. He may be telling the truth, which would be extremely dangerous.
He may be telling the truth. He may be talking complete nonsense. I don't know. But it can't be that bad, because 2.1 million views, 0 complaints. It doesn't sound like he's needing run out of the country, really.
So I believe this is the source of the problem.
Yes, and this blog reported him and attacked him and got the mainstream Scottish press, fake news, Daily Record, to pick up on it and attack this blogger. So it's one blog attacking another blog and getting allies. And I just said, oh, well, what are this lot about? And it says, what we're about. And there we have 1,000 Flowers, a Scottish blog launched on International Women's Day 2013 by an unsavoury cabal of queers, feminists and trolls. Seditious gossip and druggy innuendo. That's what they say about themselves. That's what we are now taking as truth. And if you have a different view to that, then it's not that you have a different view, that you have views which cannot be spoken and must be prosecuted and persecuted. And they got a whole series of useless MSPs to say how bad this chap was, and obviously none of them knew what he was saying, and but they were quite happy to condemn him anyway.
But it's all right, David, because the Daily Record must be a top flight newspaper because it's got a new columnist.
It's good to see Nippy's got a job. I was starting to worry how she'd fill the hours, and I suppose if you write the news, you can have a few complaints about the content. So there we go. Yes.
So what is the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, doing writing for the Daily Record?
The Daily Record, which has traditionally been the main Labour Party supporting paper in Scotland, isn't that an interesting thing? So this is trying to co-opt the press. There isn't really a dividing line between the press and the politicians in Scotland. It's far too cosy. And of course, the proper relationship is a relationship between a dog and a lamppost.
Yes. Now, David, I've put this one in for a little bit of comment from you. Now, yesterday we were talking about Craig Murray's blog post asking why the Israeli gentleman who attempted to subvert British politics hadn't been expelled from the country yet. And then I saw this today from the Zionist Federation, because what they're doing is running the annual lobbying day for Israel, where you can go and lobby your MP if you're pro-Israel. That's happening on the 25th of January. And before that, in the run-up to that event, they're holding an event called Truth to Power, Lobbying 101, where they're running a course for how you can lobby your MP in a pro-Israeli way before the annual lobby day for Israel. So for a tenner, you can be trained in how to be a lobbyist for Israel. This country is in a pretty bad state with regard to this relationship.
It's a very strange relationship. We don't seem to have the same view that it's a separate country with separate interests, perhaps overlapping, perhaps contrary to ours, and should be treated as such, because we've got the entire Conservative Party in Conservative Friends of Israel. There isn't anything comparable anywhere in the world, and the lobbying effort is extremely high level, extremely well funded, extremely organised, and increasingly failing.
Right, good. So we've got about 2 minutes left, David, and quite a bit to get through here. So we'll be quick. A bit of good news on the name person scheme, or is it?
Well, good and bad, or bad and good. Well, this was a decision notice from the Information Commissioner, Freedom of Information Commissioner in Scotland. The application had gone in to seek information on the advice given by the Scottish Government solicitor, a man called Wolfe, who's now Lord Advocate and the highest law officer in Scotland. This advice was that the named person scheme was lawful, and that turned out to be wrong. It was deemed unlawful by the Supreme Court. And of course, this cost the Scottish taxpayer £500,000 in court costs, all of which had to be picked up by the Scottish Government, who lost big time. So the question was, what was the advice, and exactly why did this go on? And although the Information Commissioner did not find that the information should be released, which is to be regretted, they backed up hugely all the arguments for transparency, and that there is a huge public interest here. So we may be able to use those comments to press for more openness. You never know, it might just work. And then we've got further on named person, we've got a major event coming up in Dundee. This has been run by the university, and you see Stuart Waiton there, who's one of the organisers, and that's coming up at towards the end of the month. Can you see the date on that?
No.
Sorry.
We'll get hold of it, David. I'll tweet it out after the programme.
So I encourage people, it's towards the end of the month, I think it's 29 or 30 of January. I encourage people to get along to Dundee and listen to that, a full analysis of what is wrong with the named person scheme and where we are now fighting it.
Okay, and just to end off then, David, Robert Greene, and this is the bailiff company where does Robert stand at the moment?
Well, he's meant to stand cowering below the mighty towers of this bailiff company. It's not quite working out that way, partly because of the UK column viewers who contacted them and wrote to them and called them and expressed concern over the way they were treating Robert. What's actually happened since then is nothing. They have not been in touch with them. Silence, tumbleweed, crickets. So Robert doesn't know what's happening. He is seeking legal advice and seeking to get things overturned, but at the moment the bailiffs are not going anywhere near him, but neither are they saying they will leave him alone. It's just hanging over him perpetually. So perhaps we should call the bailiffs one more time and ask them to lay off Robert Greene and to formally tell him that he has nothing more to fear from them and they will not be bothering him anymore.
Okay, thank you very much, David.
Well, that brings us to the end of what I'm sure was a pretty interesting news. Amazing things happen, some of it extremely dangerous. Graham, would you just in 30 seconds just like to finish off with anything you like, remind viewers about your talk that you'll be giving?
That's in AV8. We're going to talk on AI in the future, where medicine's pushing us in technology. That's going to be an incredible talk. I'm putting that together as we speak. But I wanted to tell something, if you want to think something funny, they just held a conference in Christmas in Goldsmith University for academics to issue papers, to present papers on having sex with robots. Okay, how crazy is that? But guess what they called it? What you call that? They've got an academic name for it. It's teledildonics.
Yeah.
Teledildonics. This is the kind of nonsense we're dealing with. Who came up with that?
I'm just going to gently say here, I don't, this word nonsense, you use it, I fall into the trap of using it as well, but we're dealing with a very, very dark and sinister agenda. And these people are not being paid for nonsense. They're being paid to do some really dangerous stuff. But anyway, thank you for that. And we look forward to hearing you speak at AV8 coming up in May. That's the end of today's news. If you're sitting there thinking, what can I do? Then the best thing for you to do is something. Get out there, tweeting, emailing, writing letters, visiting your MP, talking to the BBC, get on their back, start challenging them. I think the other side is beginning to reveal they're very, very frightened at what can happen when millions of people actually wake up and say, no, we're not having this nonsense anymore. We need the truth and we need to get back to some form of morality and standards for proper human life. So you must do something. The moment you do it, you'll feel better. That's it for today. We'll be back at the same time on Monday. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.